and welcome to a new episode of the State of the Net podcast. I'm Paolo Valdemarin.
And I'm Euan Semple.
And it's a special occasion today, right?
Yes, one that who would have thought. Today, 20 years ago, I wrote my first blog post. And as I say, little idea that I'd still be here 20 years later. 20 years later seemed like an incredibly long time, but to still be blogging all this time later. And I sort of thought I'd lost it at one point because I did an ISP change and didn't have the first few posts. And I then thought, I know what, I'll get it from the Internet Archive. But again, for some reason, probably related to that swap, I couldn't find the original. I think it was a couple of years or so. And then it dawned on me that, do you remember Ev Williams used to have a thing he called blogs of note? For those who don't know, Ev set up Blogger and then Twitter and various other things. And he had this bit on his blog called Blogs of Note where he'd link to other bloggers. And he'd linked to me. So that was actually the bit that got scraped and was kept in Internet Archive, allowed me to find my first post again. But it sort of brought back the night when I was sitting in the lounge, and you know, it's like, especially in the early days, you would just have a look at the stats and see if anybody looked at your blog, and it was kind of like, you know, the normal 10, 15, whatever. And then I looked back another half an hour later, and it was about 400 or 500. And this carried on until I think it went up to about 5,000 hits in one day, which was initially perplexing, and then I realised what it was that he'd stuck me on the front of his blog. So anyway, yeah, I was able to dig out my first blog post from 20 years ago.
That's amazing.
I know.
We have to link them in the description of this.
Yeah.
Of this.
Well, it's funny.
What did you write about?
About being in the pub, because in those days I drank, with my kids, and yeah, I mean, it's funny just seeing the colour scheme. It was sort of a standard blogger scheme. It was black and orange, I think it was, and
yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, and a nice typeface, and yeah, it's funny sort of. I mean, because without that blog, I wouldn't have ended up travelling around the world, meeting loads of people, writing a book. You know, none of that would have happened without that first step.
We wouldn't be here.
That's true. Well, we'd be here, but not here.
Yeah, well,
I don't think I had much to do with your
would
conception.
Be here recording this.
Yeah.
No, it's actually when you mentioned your anniversary, I checked mine. I started blogging a year later in 2002. It was post 9/11, and yeah, I mean, I started. Me too. I mean, I started because I was dealing with the Dave Weiner, and we were using Radio Userland, which was one of the
of course, yeah, I used that for
time.
a bit, yeah.
And I think in 2001 we were using blogging internally in our company to exchange information, but I never had anything posted in public. And then one day I did, and I still have on my domain. Well, I changed domain name, but it's still on my blog. The first posts, they're still there. I managed to kind of keep them over the years.
Yeah, I should probably try and rebuild those first few posts, but because the other thing that came back to memory was with Doc Searles, because that was another big jump in my visibility, because we must have been connected in some way. Because he picked up on this post, but it was after 9/11, just you mentioning that reminded me that, you know, it was in the days after 9/11, everybody was very emotional and the world seemed turned upside down. And I'd gone out for a walk with my daughter Molly, who was about 3 maybe at the time, and it was as the day was coming to a close, and she was asking, what makes the sun go down, Daddy? And I sort of tried to explain the fact that the sun's staying where it is, but that the world goes round and the world spins and it keeps going round, so that's why the sun comes back up in the mornings. And she said, well, the world must get very dizzy-wizzy, Daddy. I said, well, it does, darling. And then she said, well, the world needs a rest. And this seemed so appropriate given the world circumstances at the time. And Doc picked up on this and shared it. So that was another jump in visibility. It's funny thinking back.
Well, it was exciting. Every time you would get a link from one of these kind of A-listers, you would get suddenly traffic and people asking questions. I mean, I think there were interesting conversations at the time. And I'm not saying that there aren't interesting conversations today, but I'm just not part of them. It was almost like, you would put something out there and then somehow conversation would find you.
Yes. Yes.
Which I think it was probably due to the fact that there weren't too many people. And did you read there is an article circulating in the last few days about how it would appear that with the new types of online tools, I think that they were mentioning in particular Clubhouse, but a few others, where you have a different type of media use where a smaller number of people will concentrate to use a higher quality piece of content for a shorter amount of time. So you, instead of having that continuous scrolling, algorithmically generated, attention sink, you basically have a moving towards better quality, more concentrated, shorter events that capture your attention.
Interesting. Certainly, that's how it felt in the early days. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's exactly it's you wouldn't spend the whole day scrolling through things. I mean, content was somehow scarce, and but somehow that also made it more valuable.
But also, just talking about that scarcity, and just before we started, you were mentioning about ISPs, and when we both got started on the internet, and I think it was either 95 or 96. I think 96. But the first time I touched it, as it were, was actually on a night shift at work, and one of the guys there used an M100 emulator to get us direct connection on to, I think it wasn't ARPANET, but it was the education one. I can't remember what it was called, where basically you're just using a command line to see catalogues of books and documents that you had no idea what they were, but it just seemed incredibly naughty for one thing. It felt almost like hacking to see it. I mean, obviously they'd made the stuff visible and it was meant to be seen, but it still felt slightly nefarious. And I can so remember getting my first modem, US Robotics 1400 baud modem, and plugging it in and just hearing that bleeping noise that meant you were connected, and the slight feeling of panic because you knew you only had so long before you got bounced off again. And you couldn't cache stuff in the way that we do so much now. And it was so... Suddenly you had this computer that was connected to the world. It was incredible, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Recently I renewed my first domain name, studioidea.it. And I registered the domain name in 95, pretty much soon after I got online for the first time. That I think it was like November 95, and that was very early web. So we were using, I think I kind of got online right before the first version of Netscape came out. And yeah, I always remember the first time I got online from home, I spent the whole night surfing the web. Yeah. And I think that pretty much by the morning, I had seen every website, like all of them. But it was so exciting. I mean, and you're right. You had the feeling that you were connecting to a server elsewhere. You're kind of peeking into other people's lives. Yeah. It was, it's.
And then the early days of Usenet, where you sort of wished you hadn't peeked into other people's lives.
Oh yeah. I mean that was. I mean the first. Do you remember the first trolls? I mean being exposed from people. It was But But at the same time, I think that what is interesting is that some of the seeds of what we have today were already pretty clear out there. I mean, it's not that, Donald Trump invented trolling.
No.
I mean, that has been around forever. He just invented being a president and a troll at the same time.
Who would have thought that was ever going to happen?
Something that I find curious is not so much the last 25 years that I've spent online, is the fact that I still have memories of the previous 25 years that I spent not being connected to the internet.
Yes.
And how most of the designers I work with were born after I bought that first domain name.
Yeah.
And it's I'm not saying, look, I'm not saying like, the son, I have shoes older than you.
You should try to be as old as me, Paolo.
Well, that must be amazing. But it's the very fact that this thing happened to us at some point, and it never happened to them. I mean, they have no idea what it was.
Well, how hard everything was. I mean, I can't remember what happened the other day that I was in the middle of a field and I used my watch to find something out, and thought nothing of it. But then it sort of struck me, wow, and it was something to do with finding a place. And in the old days, you had to have real maps, and you had to be able to go and buy the real. You couldn't just order the real maps online. You had to go to a shop.
God forbid, ask for direction.
I know. We used to be terrible, Paolo. We had a junction at the top of our road, and if people stopped and asked for directions, if they were Scottish, we sent them the right way. If they were English, we sent them the opposite way.
A few weeks ago, I was out for a walk with my brother, and we found a weird fruit on the ground. And he has said, "Oh, too bad there isn't an app that allows you to find out what it is." I said, "Well,
he underestimated you, Paolo."
Yeah. And you just fire up Google. With the Google app, you can just do the visual search, and immediately we got information about what, I don't remember what it was, but it was some strange. I have no idea how that landed on a hill here. Yeah. But this idea of being able to find any information that you like, I think that the first time I remember I was so happy about this. I was still working in an office we had floor to ceiling glass walls, and the building was right next to the exit of the local motorway. And I saw this special truck with this huge wooden crate in the back just passing by. Yeah. And I thought, I wonder what is in the crate. I said, hold on a second, I can find out. I looked up the name that was printed on the crate. I found out it was a company making transformers or something. But basically, I found out what it is. And that was like, okay, there is, you can figure out pretty much everything.
And, I know there's people who say it's made us lazy, and, God bless Cal Newport for finding fault with all of it. But it's stuff that has made life so much better just to be able to find things out quickly and easily, or to be able to order things quickly or easily. It's ridiculous to look back on not being able to do that with any sort of nostalgia. I mean, sure, it's come at a cost, and we've talked often enough on the blog, not on the blog, on the podcast about that. But it so much of what makes life easier. I mean, even just all the things I've learned because of following people writing about books and then buying the books on Amazon. And although there are those who might argue I've read all these books but learned absolutely nothing. But that ability to not just soak up soundbitey, partial information, which is what people normally criticize, but just reading more and more relevant and interesting books would be hard to imagine having happened without all this.
Yeah, well, you remember the whole theory when it came out of the long tail, and how these something interesting. I think there is an article on The Economist this week about this, and they talk about the evolution of e-commerce and online services in Asia, especially in China.
Mm-hmm.
And they were noting how in Europe we tend to have essentially the digital version of companies that existed before in the physical world. Right? So you have the bookstore, you have the company processing payments, you have the company doing social networking, you have the company doing communication. Even very large companies in the Western technology world tend to be kind of monolithic, vertical, specializing in something, with to some degree is the equivalent of something from the old world.
Yep.
While in China, all these huge companies, they are way more horizontal, intersecting e-commerce with social media, with payments, with chats, with everything. It almost looked like, they don't need to plug this new digital world to an existing framework. They can just go wild and do new things. Essentially, they don't remember the word before. They are, they're starting a new.
And that's so true. And I mean, there are so many organizations still really encumbered with that legacy thinking. It still sustains so many of the silos that operate within organizations and the pecking orders within those organizations that haven't had relevance for decades, but are just there because the culture's become ingrained and dominant. And just beyond it, within a company, between companies, the whole way we perceive value and trade and even influence. I still find it funny how many of my former BBC colleagues still bang on about the truth. Seems so nostalgic.
I think I think that, and I wonder how much of this is actually part of Western philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly, in our culture, in order to understand something, we tend to say, "Oh, this is like something else."
Yes.
It is very typical that you're struggling to understand something, and you said, "Oh, okay, this is like," and you pick up something that is somehow equivalent.
And also reductionism, reducing that to the smallest bit that you can.
Yeah. But I wonder if this is the main reason why you think, oh, Amazon, well, that's like a bookstore, and your Apple, well, that's like the phone. I mean, you kind of keep simplifying things, and you need to put something to pigeonhole all these different concepts. While if you don't need to do that, and I think that, well, one reason is that you don't actually have the same categories to drop things into, but partially might even be that Eastern cultures don't need to do that, or have different ways of understanding things.
So true, and not least because, and again we've talked about this, that the interconnectedness that's so apparent with the web is so fundamental to their historical worldview, whereas sort of separation and self and identity is so key to ours, and that connectedness feels like a challenge to that identity. I mean, this is what's so interesting about fundamentalist politics and other things, because I think they're triggered by the web and the sort of squishiness of it all, and the fact that hasn't got enough straight lines, or the labels don't stick long enough. I think you're so right, and it's going to be really interesting in the next few decades just to see, again, post COVID, how much of that has been shaken a bit again, and how fast we adapt. I mean, talking of adapting, I've just got my appointment for my first vaccine, and coming up on Monday, and it just made me think how incredibly, for all the faults and all the people that slag it off, how incredibly efficient the NHS can be. Just to have got, 20 million people vaccinated? And the process is so well done. I mean, the paperwork's excellent, the barcoding and QR coding and everything just works pretty much. Any bit of it I've been involved with so far. And, you think that doesn't just happen. It's incredible.
Oh no, that is it is remarkable, especially confronted with the rest of the EU.
You seem to be.
Well,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have to say it. Well, especially when we compare to with the EU, which is not the rest,
No,
it's just another
that's
place. But it's I mean, even if in Italy, I think we're kind of doing slightly better. I think we haven't gotten to 10% of the population. I mean, it's still ridiculously small.
Yeah.
And something interesting that I was reading recently, somebody was criticizing the Italian model promoting the British one. We're saying in Italy, we started thinking, okay, who are we going to give the vaccine first? And we immediately came up with 100 different categories that are hard to define. So it's going to be people working there and people going there and in universities and in hospital and in there and in there. And basically everything became immediately very confused. While in Britain, pretty much they said, except for some emergency worker, they just said we're going to go with age, because that's the main factor, and we're just going to stick with age, and we're going to go from the older to the younger.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, and it is actually one of the many decisions, of course, that are making this work very, very well.
Yeah.
So I had a flight back booked.
Oh yeah.
But my flight has been cancelled. So now I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to book another flight in March to get back, because I want to come and get my vaccine, of course. It's that's not easy, because you need to get tested before you flight. Once you get there, you need to purchase before you depart 2 more tests that cost like more than 200 quid.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, here, I think they have capped the cost of the test to 20 euros.
So there's different kinds of tests, because they're doing...
Not in the UK, clearly.
Well, no, there are. I can't remember what they're called. Flow something?
No. They haven't capped the prices. No, there are. Yeah, there are 3 main types of tests.
Yeah, and the flow tests, whichever they are becoming drop-in. You know, you can get multiple at one time. You can. Penny was just talking about this morning, that she's going to get half a dozen, and then it means she can just, before she visits somebody or whatever, you know, well, we can't visit people yet, but when she does, she'd be able to just quickly test.
Here they're starting to give tested in pharmacies, and you can just buy your own tests. I know that my brother has lots and lots of children, and they all go to schools and skiing and other type of activity. They need to get tested all the time, continuously. So it's quite an enterprise.
Talking about health and technology, and well, we can work out whether it's a good or a bad thing, but it's really interesting having the time to invest more time and attention in the health stuff that's been on the watch, which, you know, I've dabbled with for a while, but, you know, using the Apple Watch plus the Fitness Plus stuff, and I'm now on I think today was my 81st consecutive day of meeting my move targets, which is because I'm at home and not an awful lot else to do, so it's not hard. But, well, I say it's not hard. They keep cranking up the amount of kilocalories I'm meant to consume or to exercise in a day.
Your move target is insane. I mean, you have like 800, 900
Yeah, it's 970,
calories.
I think it is now.
That's just crazy.
I know, well, but it's my own fault. I mean, because it's where the algorithm, as you rightly said, I need to fight for my freedom from the algorithm. But I'm getting in at least 6 and very often 10 miles of walking a day, and loving it, really, really loving it. And but it's a rod for my own back, you know.
I was thinking about you the other day, because you post in your blog that, you know, you have to be out walking at least 3 hours a day to meet your goal. Yeah. And I was thinking, you know, my poor friend, he's out walking because his watch told him to. You know, he's forced to do that every day for 3 hours.
No, I mean, because that's the other side of this, that, you know, we've lived in this house for 27 years now, And over those years, I've walked every single path within about a 20-mile radius, but many of them not for a long time. And I'm genuinely just loving going out and being in the world. And, even just today I stopped to take it all in, and this horse ran across a big field to come and say hello to me, sort of thing, It's so easy to forget things like that. And I've been enjoying watching your walking and your photographs of your walks, Paolo, because I often get a bit belligerent about this and think it ought to be obligatory for national leaders and chief executive businesses just to be forced to go out for a walk in the countryside at least once a week.
Oh yeah,
just for the rebalancing effect.
I'm happy that in the last 5 months I've been able to, and I literally went almost every day. And I mean, for the last 2 months I literally went every day, because as soon as I'm gonna get back in London, then I might be able to get to a park every once in a while, but there's no nature and wild nature like you can get here, or where you are, and it's I'm gonna miss it.
You're not that far. You're only a couple of miles from the Thames.
Yeah, well, I can
straight down.
I can even less than that. I mean, I can get to the Thames pretty quick. I can take a bus and be on the Thames in 10-15 minutes, and I can actually cross. I can just cross to Kew, and the first. I just renewed my membership for Kew Gardens.
Oh, cool.
Or you can walk along the river. It's very flat walking along the river, but you can,
sort of by definition.
Yeah,
yep.
But you can walk along the river, which is nice. Or if I actually stay on that bus a little bit longer, I can get to Richmond Park, and that is nice, and that is wild. That is, I mean, you have deers running.
Amazingly
around.
wild, yeah.
That feels like you are in the wilderness.
Well, if you get the bug, there's a book, and it used to be called The Green London Way when I did it. Don't know, and I think it's been renamed now. But it's a 125-mile circuit round London, so it's sort of a long way within the boundaries of Greater London. But it strings together disused railways, canal paths, a bit of the river, big cemeteries, parks like Richmond Park, whatever, into a roughly circular loop. And it's just really satisfying to walk, because it makes you realise just how hilly London actually is.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that there are these clay, I think they are mostly deposits round the river that have, in some cases, a quite reasonable height. And it just gives you a very satisfying sense of the shape of the city, the river, and the ups and downs shape as well.
Yeah. Well, from where I am, if I walk west a little bit, I actually intercept the Grand Union Canal. And
I was going to say that's another option.
That's also very nice. You can walk around it. And what is interesting, and something that makes you realize of how hilly and moving is that the Grand Union Canal actually is. There are a couple of overpasses where the canals actually goes over the motorway.
Yeah.
Which I once I realized every time I was driving under it, saying, "Hey, we're driving under a canal. How cool is that?"
And of course it comes all the way up to Birmingham. It comes past us.
Yeah.
I used to commute along the banks of that on my. I had a fold-up bike, and I would drive to closer to London than we are here. I couldn't cycle all the way every day, and then had a 10-mile journey each way along the banks of the canal, which was a great way to get to work in the mornings. Yeah,
well, I'll need to go discover new paths around Ealing. Oh, by the way, speaking of Ealing, you know the store they opened a couple of years ago, the Amazon store, where you can just walk in, buy grocery, and then just walk away, and it will charge your app. They're going to open one in Ealing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like this week or next week, apparently pretty soon.
Wow.
The first test store.
It's sort of odd, given that the way that Amazon's going bananas at the moment, because nobody wants to go to stores. That's weird.
Well, apparently they're going to open one in a shopping center. You know the shopping center right close to my flat.
Yeah.
So that's another reason to come back. There is going
wow.
to be the first, and apparently it's, you just walk in with the app, you grab what you need to take, and just walk out, and they'll charge
What, you
your.
mean just like you did in Marks and Spencer's?
Yeah, but this time they should not arrest you.
I hope not. You are very suspicious looking.
Yeah, especially if I'm wearing a face mask. It's so funny, the fact that even today we drove to the local town to go to the bank with my wife, and we were sitting in the car, and before leaving the car we wore our mask and said, okay, let's get in, and it feels so much like you're going for a robbery. It's
That's funny, isn't it?
and
Well, and I was thinking, we were talking to the girls about the amount of fuss that used to be made about burqas.
mhm.
And how you couldn't see people's faces, and well, where's that all gone now that everybody's wearing masks? It's funny how that thing that seems such a big issue just suddenly gets completely eclipsed by the fact that, well, you can see nobody's face, so get over it.
Did you install the new update of iOS? That,
Not yet. It's not out yet, is it? Still in
yeah,
beta.
it's a beta, but so good. It
Really?
works. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but probably 80% of the time you unlock your phone and it unlocks the phone with a watch, which is if you're wearing a face mask is it's pretty good. It's
I still got a silly buzz every time I walk up to the Mac and press the mouse, and I feel my wrist buzz, and that's it. Unlocking
yeah,
it.
it's basically it's the same. You get the same notification on your watch about the unlocking. It is the same notification, and it's it is working pretty well. I also like how there are those new drop down notifications on iOS. So, for example, when you unlock your watch with your phone, you get a little notification. I think they are, or maybe this is part of the new update, but I think they're doing a pretty good job in telling you every time something happens. Even, for example, when you paste something, they will tell you,
yes, I've seen
this
that.
was,
Yes.
this was, it is coming from another place. And of course, you can copy something on your phone and paste it on your Mac, and the Mac will tell you, I'm pasting it from your phone. I kind of like that because it's a very solid, UI design telling people what is happening all the time. It helps you be informed.
And it is all the time. It's reliable, isn't it? It's quite robust.
Yeah, no, it's
you learn to trust it. Yeah,
it is getting better. It's reliable enough that you don't notice it anymore.
Bit like life.
Okay. Not sure. I think that we can leave our listener pondering about this.
Well, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening, and goodbye.